Hello and welcome to this video. I'm not sure if what I'm gonna call it, but this is a basic video about light language and what it is in one concept, my concept, conceptualization, timelines, frequencies, and dimensions. We're going a little bit down the rabbit hole today. So if you haven't watched these videos before, thank you, or if you have, and you need a little refresher on what synchronicity is, this video is essentially done in a synchronistic flow based on patterning that I am bringing forth to tap into a different style of communication with our guidance system, our source energy, our higher selves, if you will, our guides. And so when I do videos, specifically have this writing all over the whiteboard, it's to trigger certain activations, to raise vibrational frequency and vibrational awareness, and essentially share with you my own interpretation and what I'm perceiving going on with the energies and activations and such. It's also meant to be a tool for you guys to learn how to do it yourself, because ultimately you may not do it in this style, but my intention is that you can use synchronicity in many ways to communicate with you on many levels, in many spectrums and such. So thank you again for just even spending your now moment with me. And I invite you to watch this video with an open heart and an open mind, and just allow whatever comes through that resonates with you. Feel that, draw it in, and whatever doesn't resonate with you, it's okay. This isn't necessarily meant to be a literal video. It's meant to be more of a feeling video. I may include some light language as activations and examples towards the end, or just throughout to interweave the connections. But my intention primarily right in this moment with the beginning of this video is to come from a more linear perspective as to what are these things? What does this mean? Why am I hearing about it, etc. My other intention is to tap into the energies to further explain not only what they are, but what it means for us in this now moment, what we're experiencing in the month of July, August, or in general. And so just like when I'll explain this maybe a little bit later, but it's just like when you hear a song, there's certain words that are tied into that song that trigger your emotions to feel better. There's certain words that are tied in with what I'm explaining and how I'm explaining to do that same thing, essentially. And also, in reference to timelines, just because you hear a song in one moment, it might mean something for you in that moment. Later on, 5 years, 10 years down the road, it might mean something completely different because of the perspective that you are listening and the senses that you are listening through when you listen to that song, right? So this is kind of the same idea. So let's get started. All right, so I wrote this down ahead of time. Usually I write it as I go, but I was in such flow when I was feeling these energies that I just had to write it down ahead of time, and it would have been a little too all over the place. So hopefully this gives us a little bit more linearity. And please don't see all this and go, oh my gosh, this is way too much. I'm going to break it down. You don't have to listen to all of it. We'll start with dimensions. I'm not going to go into it a lot. Very basic explanation. We're going to go into timelines, then we're going to go into light language, and then we're going to go backtrack and tie it all together. I intend that. No guarantees. So first, let's start with dimensions. I'm starting here because I do refer a lot to dimensions, and it means something different for a lot of people. This is from my own interpretation and perception of what they are, and this is a very basic, linear, well, I don't want to say linear. It's a very basic explanation. It's not exact, none of this is exact. Some of it is just meant to trigger certain things. So just briefly, dimensions. I refer to dimensions. This is not all of the dimensions that are out there, are within us, that are around us. And I'm not going to go too deep into that. I'm only going into what will help you understand this video. So I'm going to explain dimensions in the sense of, and if dimensions as a frequency. So if you hear the word dimensions and you go, okay, that's out of my scope of reality, that's okay. Just use the word and replace it with frequency. So every time I say the word dimension, think of vibration, think of frequency, because in my version of reality, that is what they are. We are in, and there is a dimension. If you look at science and scientists and the theories about dimensions, that's a very fascinating field of information. So I'm going to for now say that we are in 3D, or we were in 3D, okay? And I'm going to use 3D as, and we're going to say layers. So these are my little dimensions here. And I know this is a lot on the board. I would suggest later on maybe take a picture, a screenshot of this, and then zoom in so you can see a little bit more detail. And I apologize, that's the biggest board that I have right now. I'm going to be getting a bigger one soon. So dimensions and frequency. Vibration. I'm going to use a very basic example. You wake up, for some reason you'd wake up and, we'll go both ends. You feel great, you're not sure what's going on, you feel great, you have a cup of coffee, getting your day started, and then you get a phone call from, let's call them a trigger, and all of a sudden you're not having a great morning. I call it energy vomit. They energy vomited all over you. You took that on, and now you're down here. So let's say you woke up, for an example, in 4D or 5D. 5D's a little bit more high vibe, obviously, than 4D. But now you're back here in 3D. So again, I'm going to draw I'm going to do little circles or X's. So you're here in 3D. Back, you started out here though. So this brings me to an important point that I'm being guided to share. You don't have to start your day here to get here. It's non-linear. If you're in your heart and you're in an expanded awareness consciousness, you may always be in a higher vibration, which means you'll be operating and perceiving things from a fifth dimensional perspective, for example. But I'm using this as an example. So I do see us oscillating right now in and out of these dimensions, okay, waves, which leads me then to, and to go in a little bit more detail, if you didn't understand that, let's say you start out on the wrong side of the bed, you have a bad morning, you go to work, somebody gives you a hug, changes your whole day around, and all of a sudden your day is just fabulous. That's another example of going from maybe a 3D, heavier, denser, woe is me, everything is how it is, linear perspective, up to a higher dimension where now you're coming from more of a heart space activation, and you've allowed those good frequencies to come in and uplift you, so to speak. I'm going to go to timeline and then jump back to dimension. This works for timelines too. A lot of you might be hearing about a timeline split. I touched on that briefly in my last video. I will be going more into detail on that. For now, let's just talk about what is a timeline. Really basic for my reality expression. You are, again, let's use the example of you started off on the wrong side of the bed, you spilled coffee on your favorite pair of white pants, you got into a fender bender on the way to work, which then made you late for work, which then caused you to get into an argument with your boss or a coworker, which then on your way home, you're feeling awful, you decide to come home and you get into an argument with a spouse or a loved one, and in a nutshell, that's how your day goes in that dimension. So again, we're maybe in 3D the whole way there, okay? But on a timeline, that is, we'll say a timeline. It's a straight space. I see everything in waves, not straight lines, but we're using that as an example. And in most timelines, we see it as point A to point B, right? You're here. And that's another I'll come back to that. Using the other example, so that timeline then, because you started off having a bad day, so to speak, and you carried that vibration with you throughout the rest of the day, it continued to bring in reality for you on that timeline. So we'll use as an example, perhaps in one theory, because you stubbed your toes, spilled coffee on your shirt, and got to a car accident, it then led you to point B to point C, point D, which was getting into an argument with a coworker, getting into a fight with your boss, and therefore coming home and getting into an argument or having a bad evening with a spouse or loved one. So those are all examples of a certain trajectory. So what launched you into that trajectory, you might see it as stubbing your foot or spilling your coffee. What I see it as, and that's true to a certain extent, but it's a vibrational frequency that you were in that kept you in that wave, okay? That wave into that reality. Now, let's say, for example, you got that hug from that coworker and it brought you into a higher space, and let's say none of those other bad things happened. So maybe you did start out by stubbing your toes, spilling your coffee on your favorite pair of pants. You got into a car accident, but then you came into work and a friend or coworker made you feel so much better. You know, let's go out to lunch and just forget about all that. I know a great body shop. You know, you'll get a discount. It won't be that expensive. You know, et cetera, et cetera. So you were down here, and now you're up here, smiley face, right? So I'm using this as an example because now you jump timelines. Now, perhaps in theory, your friend took you out to lunch, you're feeling really good, and the rest of your day goes great. You come home and your spouse isn't mad at you because you crashed the car, or your kids are actually in a good mood, and you're seeing things from a different perspective. So let's say none of that other stuff happened, okay? You now jumped a timeline. That's a big example. And in theory, we're doing that all the time, every day, in every moment. And I come back to momentum. I use that a lot as a definition in my videos. Momentum, moment to moment. So one action or one reaction led you to the next, which then kept you in this wave, rather than allowing you to shift your frequency to bring you out of that to put you in a higher trajectory. So now this timeline A, your trajectory was to get into a car accident. Now we say if you were able to get yourself out of that low timeline, the theory is you start out, you spill coffee, and you just go, it is what it is. Not that I like to use that term, but sometimes it can be very helpful in some linear 3D perspectives to realize that that just happened. It's okay to just let that go and to shift into another perspective, which then allows you to maybe avoid getting into that car accident because you're not distracted by thoughts that are not allowing you to pay attention to what's around you in that moment. Now, I'm kind of going off on a tangent on timelines here, and that'll be a whole other video where I go into more examples of that, but you see where we're coming from in this perspective. Okay, so just to recap, in the way I see it is we're constantly creating timelines, and I'm coming back to, I use these little guys as quirks. So you can talk about this on a molecular level, which I'm not a scientist in this reality, in this now moment, but I am drawn to science, and I am drawn through coagulations and synchronicities, which I'll come back to in a minute, science. And so I'm going to go into here briefly and look up quirks. So I see this as, so there is, and I'm going to get into a little science here. Maybe I should save that, come back to that full circle, because otherwise will be too much. But you get where I'm saying. Hopefully you're oscillating in and out of timelines by the choices that you're making in that moment. These are affected, or the effect of your choices is then patterned into your, creating a pattern in your frequency pattern, if you will, and creating a trajectory of a possible outcome and timeline, all right, that you are then in alignment with. Okay, having said that, We can change it at any moment to moment to moment. Now, where does this all bring me with, without going too deep into that's another video, I want to get into light language. So essentially, what is affecting our timelines is how we are perceiving, okay? Perceiving. And the reason I'm saying this is because it's a play on words, perception, and how are we using our senses moment to moment. And I'm primarily going to touch on language, tones, frequencies, and that today, but how are we using our smell, sight, sound, touch, and extrasensory perceptions as well in order to launch us into the most highest, most loving, most high vibrational timeline frequency. And one of the ways that we can do that, one of the tools that we can use is music, right? Why does music make us feel better? Let's use that example. You're in the car, you put on a song. I like to rock out to the 80s. You know, I'm putting on a song, I'm rocking out to the 80s, and I just feel better. And all of a sudden, that car accident maybe doesn't happen because I'm awakening my senses, and I look and I see that car coming out of the woodwork, and all of a sudden I go, oh, hit the brakes, and he misses me. And I go, oh wow, I'm so glad. And that shifts the trajectory. Now you have one timeline where you got into a car accident, could have, and then the other timeline you didn't get into a car accident. Again, that's another video on timeline jumping. But that's an idea of how timelines work, just a very basic form. It's also an idea how dimensions work. And the reason I'm bringing this into language and sensory is light language is essentially weaving patterns together so that you, and breaking up patterns at the same time. So I wrote down haiku because I'm going to come back to that. A poem is a form of weaving a visual aspect into your reality. So when you visualize something or when you hear something, okay, it vibrates at a certain frequency, which can be uplifting or it can have the opposite effect or neutralize, right? And essentially, when you speak words, okay, I'm coming back into that sound, the words have a certain frequency, okay? And that's what light language does, is it connects with us on a non-linear level. We hear the words and we feel a certain way about it, okay? And I'm going to jump into a weaving in a dialect. So if you want to get real basic, there is the English language, okay? The English language is a certain linguistic way of speaking certain words, right? For understanding. So in the United States, that is our primary form of language. Obviously in other countries, Spanish is their primary. French is their primary. But even though we have all of these different languages, we all are speaking the same words, although in some languages you have more words than the English language might even have in the dictionary, we'll say. So in dictation form. So in some languages, there's more words, for example, to describe or to say the word love. I've used this example in other videos. I believe in other languages, they might have 30 different words, don't quote me on that, to say love. We have one word, love. Okay, we could say gratitude, but that has a different meaning if you look it up in the dictionary. So we might call that similar words, right? If you look up in the thesaurus, it's giving you examples of other words to describe what you're trying to say. Light language can also be put into that category. because even though it's a certain word, it's taking on perhaps the vibration of all of those meanings of the word love, for example. Now, that's the positive aspect of that. And I'm tying this together, language as far as what light language is, but just language in general. Then we have certain dialects. So in the United States, we have 50 states, right? Or technically, we have other countries that are under our jurisdiction. We have, bottom line is, we have a lot of under the wing, under the umbrella of the United States, right? So under that umbrella of the United States, we'll say English is the primary linguistic language, okay? But you have dialects. So I'll never forget, I'm in the restroom out of state, and some lady with this lovely, I don't know, Kentucky accent asks me where I'm from. And I tell her I'm from California. And she goes, "Oh, California." And she says it with her accent. "I thought y'all had an accent." That's how she said it. And of course, me being from California, I don't think I've got the accent. I think she's got the accent. We've all got the accent based on where we are. And this is an example I'm sharing with you because from her perspective, I was the one with the accent. From my perspective, she was the one with the accent. Which one was right? Which one was wrong? You know, we could go so many places with this because this is all nonlinear thinking, you guys. We're going out there. And so I want to draw that into more of expanding your awareness of what language is, what it represents, what the tonal frequencies are really all about, what feeling it emits to you, because we're being offered to basically step into a different timeline. We're being offered to step into a different dimension, a different reality. And part of that is what we are interpreting language as. In addition to that, we are essentially rewriting our language. Or if you look at it in a circle, rediscovering our ancient languages that were far more advanced, or if you want to look at it in future tense, we are becoming far more advanced, right? I'm trying to go to all different aspects here to incorporate and to reform or create new form of these frequencies in language, in writing, in words. So imagine if you're a writer and you have 30 different words for the word love. And I like to use reference because I was looking up, I can't remember what my bubble chart was the other day. I went down the rabbit hole and it was leading me to language about, okay, here we go. So I'm going back to my example of haiku, all right? And it's talking about syllable weight and how that has something to do with time. So I'm going to go a little deeper into the rabbit hole on that one on another video. But essentially, if you're using certain words to create images, in creating those images, you are imagining, which is therefore creating a frequency, right? So I'm running out of room here, but I'm just going to put over here imaging frequency. Imaging. So words and tones create an image in your mind, just like when sometimes you'll hear light language and you might see color, because it's a frequency that is resonating with you on a completely different vibration than what you're used to. Remember, I keep saying in my videos, used to is past tense. We are not the same being, so we are evolving, and this is changing for us. So the linguistics, the way words are spoken and the meaning behind them, we are being invited to tap into a higher frequency that, let's say, I'm going to come back to, this is where I'm going to come back to the timelines. If you were in a lower dimension vibration and you're in timeline A, which is we'll say the the poopy day A, and timeline B, which is the beautiful timeline of having a beautiful day, you obviously can oscillate in and out of those. And from those, you're creating different things that are pulling from those different timelines, which are then creating a new trajectory. Another ball of wax. But my point is that if you are going in and out of these timelines and you're in the poopy patterning, so you're in timeline A, poopy patterning, you're having a poopy day. It's just kind of a fun word to say. I know it's not very polite, but again. So you get the idea. And you are essentially drawing to you and sending out patterns and frequencies and waves. And so we're also being invited to recognize that in our speech patterns and what we're listening to and what we are saying. So you might say, I'm having a really bad day. Well, today really stinks. On a bubble chart with, anyways, today really stinks. You might text someone your poop emoji. This is how my day is. Well, essentially, if that is what you're telling yourself in that moment to moment, that is the momentum that is carrying you forward into the next frequency pattern. So words, I don't want to go too much into that, although that's, like I said, can get really, you can kind of go through so many levels with that. What you are visualizing and imagining is creating a frequency pattern. So if you're imagining a poopy emoji, and that is your definition of your day, you're going to create maybe, let's say, a black cloud around you that doesn't necessarily go away. If you look at my other video on Pigpen, right? We have that picture of Pigpen from Charlie Brown with the little flies swarming around him because he's having a, not very clean. His energy isn't very clean. It's all relative, which is going to lead me into the theory, the quantum. Anyways, again, I'm non-linear right now, so I'm kind of all over the place. So bear with me, guys. So your visualizations and your imagining is shaping your frequency patterns, right? So if you are listening to someone or something, and this is so many layers, guys, but I'm just talking on a sensory level from a linear perspective somewhat. You are listening, you're hearing a word, and you are then assigning an image to that word that then assigns a frequency to that image, which then plays back in your reality. It's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is you are essentially, let's say, I'm going to skip to the charge. Your electrical charge is down here. You're sick, you're not feeling good, you're again in this lower vibration. What you are imagining and seeing is based on and from that frequency perspective. And I'm just going to go with the flow here. Maybe I'm just going to include timelines in this. Essentially think of a movie projector. If what are you projecting onto that screen in front of you in your trajectory timeline? But also, this has to do with the language. So I'm sharing this with you to be aware of the words that you're saying. Be aware of the words that you're telling yourself and telling others. And realize that this is creating a pattern, an interweaving, an intermingling, a spiraling, if you will, of, I'm seeing a spiral staircase. So it's either going to take you straight ahead and it's a bridge, or it's going to take you up into another level. And you are choosing moment to moment what that energy is and what it reflects. It reflects from a pattern that's been created within you. So imagery, coming back to the dialect. So language and dialect. So back to my example of the dialect. I was drawn to the word phonetics. And I have all of these windows open. And so I'm going to go into phonetics. because phonetics isn't really, okay. So we're looking at dialects. I'm seeing that as a play on word, as a dial up. How are you dialing up into your internet? Which cable are you choosing to go through? Which electrical conduit are you choosing to use in this now moment? What patterns are you weaving in your reality? So if you're saying certain words, they are shaping and stimulating a certain frequency within you that then in my reality creates your different timelines. Okay? And so the more you're aware of your frequency in your words and what you're allowing into your senses, what you're hearing and speaking primarily is the sense that I'm focusing on right now, is all a big part of, remember, we have many senses, but imagine just these two senses of speech and sound, listening and tone and speaking, how much they're affecting your timelines that you are jumping in and out of. So one of the quickest ways you can jump from point A to point B, and let's go higher, a higher note, is through music. Okay? Light language is a form of music, and we'll get into that a little bit later. So, dialing up and dialing in. That's part of what this language does. It's a phone. Okay? And I'm being drawn to say, I've had dreams, and maybe some of you have too, of loved ones that have passed on. Quite frequently, when I have a dream of a loved one that has passed on, they're talking to me on a telephone. And it's symbolic of many things, and we could go into that, a whole other video on that. But if you think of a telephone, you have to dial in a certain pattern and number in order to reach the person. I'm using an old school visual, okay? Obviously, we just push a button now. But essentially what that does is that tells the computer the vibrational number encoding frequency in order to tap into those lines to connect with that person. So you're doing that on all levels, on the people that you're connecting with, on the realities that you're projecting. And so you are phoning in through your phonetics, in a sense, and creating a pattern, a code that then is established in your reality. So be aware of what you're imagining. This is waking up within us, and it's waking each other up, okay? And so it is offering a bigger metaphor of our experience of understanding, a haiku. We are now being asked to read between the lines. And I touched on this in my video yesterday. Read between the timelines. You know, read between the frequencies and start to ask yourself, what does this word mean to me? So I say, I'm going to use the word ego, for example. In the beginning, when I heard the word ego, I didn't realize how it triggered me into a space of, ooh, because we think of egotistical, egomaniac, etc. There's a bigger understanding to the word ego, and now when I say the word ego, I don't have the connotations that I had before I came to this timeline, came up into this dimension. Before it, I associated with it negativity. Now I associate with it other things. I'm going to use the example I used the other day in my video with the pitchfork analogy. And thank you, my dear friend, for allowing me to use this example. This friend of mine has actually been a trigger for me to get to this point. And so we oscillate in between these things, by the way, with each other. So someday, I just want to jump around a little bit here. You might be on this, I used the example of you were on a timeline A, the poopy timeline, your friend took you out to lunch, gave you a hug, brought you up to the beautiful timeline, okay? You are oscillating in 3D, now you're in 5D, and all your experiences are coming from a heartfelt unity because your friend did that for you. That's what we're doing for each other, guys. That's part of this. And so my friend and I, one of my friends, many of my friends, this happens with all of us, but one of my friends sees things in this way as well. And so we went for a drive. We saw this image that looked like a fork. Okay. She saw it as devil horns because she was in a space of assimilating shadow self, and I saw it as a tuning fork, and it's really meant both things, because from both aspects, you know, what does a pitchfork represent? You know, yeah, okay, the devil, but it's trying to prod you and, you know, get you to move, get you to feel something, right? You might associate it with pain. I associate it with expansion. So I saw that from a different perspective than what she saw it as. But once I said, hey, this is how I see it, it changed her whole perception on what was going on for her synchronicities. And I'm sharing this with you because this is how it works. I might do a flow chart one day and it means something totally different than what it means the next day. Okay, back to shaping. So the way that it was described as visualization is, and the hearing, the language, light language is a visualization as well as a feelingization. We are shaping a conduit stimuli electrical charge. Okay. I put star language because the way that I looked at it was, star language is a gaseous, right? How do stars form? They're these gaseous particles, and then they form, let's say, into a form. So if we think about it, language came from what? A feeling. Now we are assigning to it a phonology, right? Phototonic, a dialing in. We're dialing a telephone, picking it up, saying hello, connecting with source, but we're creating a form out of this substance of feeling and senses. So again, what are you sensing in your language, in other people's language, in the language on the television? Back to light language and tones. So I see light language as a high definition language, HD. All right, so high. It's an HD tone. It's an, you know, when you watch television in non-HD, you don't see things as clearly. You don't feel it the way that you do when you watch things in high definition. All of a sudden, you're tuning in to a certain frequency. And guys, I'm speaking on many levels right here. I'm not just referring to light language now. I'm also referring to what's being offered to us in this dimensional shift in a lot of the things that are happening within our bodies and within our matrix, okay? So basically we're forming, and I'm going to use star language as an example because we are formed from the stars. We're all stars. We're all made up of the same chemical compounds and components of stars. So in a sense, everything's a star. So language is many forms, many dialects, many, okay, before I go off on that tangent. So what we're doing is we're congealing, right? A gaseous substance, we'll say a star, we're forming a pattern that then becomes a language, which may have certain dialects. So I brought up congeal to go into, the definition is to solidify or coagulate. I do love saying that word, coagulate, by cooling. And taking shapes, it says take shape or coalesce, okay? Coalescence, right? To form a satisfying whole. By the way, I see that as double, W-H-O-L-E, but I also see it as forming a whole, as in not a black hole, but a quantum jump, as I see it. What is a black hole? We'll call it a wormhole. So I also see language as forming from, let's say, a star turning into a wormhole. And so it's congealing. You guys, this is very multidimensional, so take with it what you resonate with. And essentially here, it's a form to satisfy a whole, oneness. That way you understand it. But I also see it congealing as a form to satisfy a time jump, to satisfy a creation or a jump into another dimension. So now we're going a little deeper into the rabbit hole, but it's fun. And then it also led me to conglomerate. So that's one end, all right? Ignore artificial. That's one end. And so language essentially, or in being invited to step outside of the box, get into the spiral, get into the circle that's a spiral. Now, back to 3D. So if star language and light language and a lot of the beautiful words that we know in the English language that inspire, fire, create this feeling, and I say this all, as I say it, I see different spellings of the word that are not in our traditional English spelling to help fire up frequencies, right? P-H-I-R-E, spiral up. That's what star language, light language does, and beautiful words in the English language. So what do the other words do? Well, I see them as confusion, okay? I do not feel that the English language, just like other things that have been created as a conglomerate, right? The English language to me in this reality that I'm seeing things as a conglomerate. And if I look at conglomerate, it says a number of different things or parts that are put or grouped together to form a whole, but remain distinct entities. So specifically, I see that as not, I don't see that as a flow. I see it as a blob. And it says a compact mass, gather together in a compact mass. Not a sense of togetherness, it's a conglomerate. So you're just putting one thing on top of each other. And if you think about it, that forms patterns. And then it creates an energy, and I see it as basically, ugh. Now, I'm not saying the English language isn't beautiful, because it is. All languages are beautiful. How we associate the energy with certain words that we're projecting into our reality, though, is what our perception of the words are, is what makes it not beautiful, right? So we'll come back to that. So I see that as more of an artificial thing. It's not a sense of natural, organic things. Often, let me use this as an example. How many times, and I guess I could have looked up some specific words, but maybe I'll do a different video on that. I just want to get to the aspect that what came through to me is confusion, and it creates a scope of magnetic withdrawal. So I see that as a play on words, withdrawal. So again, drawing a conclusion, right, that is created through the words that we are speaking, and that we are essentially then patterning into a cohesive coagulation conglomerate of binding, okay? And so then that leads me to what came up was the tie that binds. And so right now, light language is being offered in a sense to cut the cords, cut the tie that binds. So if you think of the old binding spells, you think of the movies you watch and people do a binding spell. The reason behind that is because words have power. So we'll think of The Little Mermaid. Who hasn't seen The Little Mermaid? If you haven't seen The Little Mermaid, I recommend it for everybody. But if you think of The Little Mermaid, it's a lot of the videos, the movies, especially Disney movies, are triggers. Yes, there's darker things hidden within some of the movies. But for example, Little Mermaid is, in essence, what I feel and what many people from a 3D perspective and 4D perspective feel has happened. Our language has been created to put a certain binding around us. If you say over and over again, oh, that sucks. Well, what does sucking mean? Taking the life out of energy. You're taking away from something. You're pulling in something. So many words are now associated or patterned with a frequency of negativity or heavier, right? Heavier, dense energies. And the more you speak a heavier, dense energy, the less you are able to, in a sense, tap into your senses, expand your senses and awareness, because now you're in here rather than out here. So the Little Mermaid, you have Ursula the Sea Witch, and she basically, the Little Mermaid signs a contract, which is a whole other video. We've heard of contracts, and essentially brings me back to the tie that binds. So your words are binding. So she signs a contract, and basically the witch takes her voice because she agrees to it. Okay? And you can see that in reference to a soul contract or a spiritual contract. But that voice then is part of Ursula's energy. So Ursula is taking the energy from the Little Mermaid. And guys, I know I'm talking about this on a metaphorical level, but it really does represent something bigger, I promise. And she takes Little Mermaid Ariel's voice and then makes it her own. That's a whole other video, right? She's then wearing that around her neck because it has empowered her. And essentially that's what words do often, is we're giving our power away. That's a whole other video. I talked a little bit about that in my last videos. So stop giving our power away in the words that we're using. And also, you know, I want to make reference one more time to speaking in tongues, because this comes up a lot. I associate, or was taught to associate speaking in tongues with a negative connotation. And for me, in this aspect, because of that, I don't refer to this as speaking in tongues. In my reality, I see there is a speech patterning, okay? And there is a vibrational frequency if someone speaks it, where they're not speaking things from here, and they're not in a higher vibrational timeline, dimension, field, and they're pulling in energy in the form of conglomerate and not an actual flow, right? So it's just this stuff that's being blurted out, and there's no feeling or understanding of what the words or the meanings behind the feelings behind the words are. I feel that that is a version of the negative aspect of speaking in tongues. So I don't refer to any of this as speaking in tongues, because to me, speaking in a tongue is a very physical description, and this is not physical. Yes, you're using your tongue and your vocal cords, but you're actually coming from here when you speak light language, if it's done in that way. If you're just, I think of tongue as a tie. You're tongue tied. You know, if you're speaking in tongues, it's a different energy. It isn't an actual flow, and it's a confusion. That's how I see it. But that's a definition. And again, some people are going to call light language speaking in tongues, and they speak a very beautiful light language. And that's, in my reality, not what they're doing. They're actually speaking in light language. I don't put the two together. I think speaking in tongues is a physical, denser energy that is, like I said, a conglomerate of things that are not a cohesive and beautiful element. Light language is different for me. That's how I see it. And you can feel it. It feels different. When it's a heavier energy, or it's not coming from source, it's not coming from a service to others space, it's more of an Ursula energy, you'll feel it. All right, so that leads me again, I kind of went into the 3D artificial, that some of our words have been meant to confuse us so that we are giving our power away. That's a totally different video, and that's not something that I intend to go over right now. But again, I'm going to come back to the words I was drawn to were a magnetic withdrawal. So you're drawing into, or you're pulling away from certain things by the words that you say, and a spatial density. So the message that I received is the old language, not the ancient language, but I'm calling some of the English words that we're using currently, or I'm going to say non-currently, because they are currents. They're a form of currency, right? But they're creating a space, a density within your space, okay? And be aware of that they're, I don't know why I wrote down referential patterning. I'll have to look that up. A referential patterning. I'll come back to that later. It's here. I'm just not pulling it out yet. And so some of this light language can be used to cut the cords, cut the ties that bind. And when I say light language, let's say you're not speaking light language. Listening to it can help cut those cords and bring you to a higher density, if you will, a lighter frequency, out of density. But the words that you're using, such as, let's say you say, Carrie, I'm never going to learn how to speak that, which we never say never, right? Another example. Or I have no desire to learn that. It's not something that's interests me, or it's not, I don't feel comfortable. Whatever your reasoning may be, just use the words that you have access to. You have access to everything, but just use the words that you're using now. And so saying things that are empowering you, like I am love, I am light, I am frequency of the highest vibration. Empowering words, we call them affirmations, to affirm, to make firm what you are vibrating towards, in, through. Okay? The less dense it is, the more you go through it, and the less of a block you are in. Box you are in. So we are cutting that tie that binds right now, and I'm being led to come back to haiku. So we're weaving in a pattern of beautiful poetry through light language and through phonetics. I'm saying photonic because it's speaking to us on a photonic level. Photon, a photographic imaging level, and a haiku, a representation, a cutting, because in haiku, words are used to cut and punctuate. And this leads me back into timelines. So watch my last video to go a little deeper into this. But coming back into haiku, by using some of these words, we're shape-shifting our reality. We're cutting and punctuating, ending on this note, right, musical note, and moving into another frequency pattern through this haiku, through this metaphor, through this poetry of understanding of light and language and sound and frequency and harmonics. All right, that's more of an energetic description of what's happening. And we are sending codes through the ethers. That's pretty self-explanatory. This leads me back to magnetics and transducers. And in a sense, we're visualizing in the words to distance ourselves from the limiting relief art. I said that earlier. What that means for me, if you look at relief painting, because I didn't know what that meant, I went relief art. I don't know what that is. So this is multidimensional. We are relieving, we're relivening this language of light that is within us, okay? We are relieving ourselves from this lower density, okay? And reliving in a higher frequency. If everything happens in a circle, if you think about it, time doesn't exist. It's a whole other video. But I'm going to say what a relief is. A relief is a sculptural technique where the sculpted elements remain attached to a solid background of the same material. So now I know why I said it. The term relief is from the Latin verb relevo, to raise. So when I say we are distancing ourselves from the limiting relief art, okay, but we are actually becoming a relief art. So we are raising. Before, it's like a raised, it's from the same sculpture. It's a different shape, right? And so the relief art, in essence, came from this substance, and it really, going into 3D lower vibration to describe several different nonlinear aspects. if we all come from, let's say you're vibrating at this lower dimension, okay, and you draw a tree or a flower, okay, this is pretty, but we'll say this is ugly. Okay, this is a lower heavy dimension, but that flower came out of this background, right? A relief art is, it came from this substance. It looks like a flower, but it's actually from the same icky substance of, I'm using like black goo, for example. You know, if you have this sludge and you form a beautiful flower out of the sludge, it's still sludge. Even though it looks and it takes on a certain frequency, the background noise is still the same harmonic. All right. So we're being relieved from those limiting. This is what is being shared with me. This is what we're experiencing in our current language. It's relief art. It's a raised braille, but it comes from a certain format. So now we're being invited into a completely different dimensional format, foundation of what this language is based around, which is light. It doesn't hold us into a certain pattern and then create waves from that holding pattern where you're stuck like glued to it, okay? And in a sense, it is raising our vibration. It's raising our foundation of where our, leading into my next subject, where our perception is coming from. So now I'm going full circle. Okay, this is hidden. It's almost like you remember the old things where you listen to a record and there's underlying elements behind the sound, or you know, frequencies. You put the record on rewind and it says an awful word behind it. That's what I'm seeing as this is what this meant. We're distancing ourselves from the limiting relief art, and it's creating a higher, raising it. Anyways, so back to perception and relativity. So I'm almost done, you guys. I'm going to go a little deeper into perception here, obviously, and it's all about what we sense is real. So I'm tying this in just with the main senses of hearing and speaking. So light, language, and tones, all right? So what we're essentially seeing here is our senses, how we're perceiving what we're saying and how we're perceiving what we're hearing are based on an old perception. And we are being invited to see things, third eye intuition, which is not seeing is believing. That is an old term. Seeing from our third eye, you don't have to see it to believe it. You feel it to know that it's there. And so we're being invited to see beyond that level and beyond that perception. Use your other senses when you hear things now. I'm being guided back to using our other senses to hear things. So just like when you were in second grade, you had a certain scope of words and what they meant. You have your master's in English, and now you have another scope of what those words mean. You know, your perception is totally different, and our perceptions are different if we allow them to be so, and we can constantly be aware of what's coming into our vibration and what we're allowing in. So what we sense is real is pulled into our reality. And our perception, I put relativity, relief, and law of attraction. So if I go into quantum theory, I'm not going into quantum theory and quantum relativity and all that. I'm not a scientist in this now moment, in this linear perspective. I am fascinated by it, though. And again, I encourage you to watch. Go on YouTube and look it up because it's interesting. But essentially, what I want to draw your awareness to is what is quantum theory. And it's the idea that it's about a highly controlled experiment demonstrating how a beam of electrons is affected by the act of being observed. So the experiment revealed that the greater the amount of watching, the greater the observer's influence on what actually takes place. All right, if you didn't know about this, it blew my mind when I first saw this. I saw this years ago and I thought, that is so cool. What does it mean? So essentially, and this is, guys, this is off of ScienceDaily.com. And I'm going to go through, when a quantum observer is watching quantum mechanics, particles can also behave as waves. So I'm not going to go too deeply into it, but essentially, it states by the very act of watching, seeing is believing, which is not an accurate way to say it, but by watching and seeing, the observer affects the observed reality. So this is a perfect example in quantum physics, I think, don't quote me on that, I think, or quantum theory, that we are changing our reality by how we perceive it, which also means we're changing, our timelines are based on how we perceive what is happening in our life, moment to momentum. How are we perceiving and what senses are we using? Are we sensing within us the vibrations that we're frequency? This is a separate subject, but you can see how this all ties in together, I hope. And so be aware that I put time capsule encapsulates, this was a quote that I wrote based on when I was in flow. Time capsule encapsulates, it's not spelled right, but some of this is meant to be misspelled. Frequency pattern, projects it into a substance, a standing wave of reality, instant gateway. Okay, so basically insulating, okay, holding it in the pattern, and then it puts us into an instant gateway. Over the threshold, holding pattern of dynamics and light frequency building blocks, patterns of energy. That is going to be another video because I'm already at an hour, but it just saying again, instant. We're shifting constantly. Yeah, so I hope you enjoyed some of this, if not all of it. I enjoyed it all. And I hope, if anything, it gives you an idea of my variation of what light language is, or my interpretation of what light language is on one level. There's so much more, and that's what's so fun about this. We are just, just now kind of tapping into all of these frequencies. Some of you may have been tapping into this for years. For me, I'm just having so much fun with it. And if I can share, don't let any of this overwhelm you. I invite you not to let any of this overwhelm you. I invite you to keep searching for things that motivate you. I heard the word spiral you, inspiral you, in a spiral rather than just a straight line. Okay, nothing's ever just a straight line. And I invite you to watch some of my older videos about synchronicity, about alignment. Take some deep breaths. This is just another perspective on how to realize that our reality isn't necessarily what we think it is, or how we've perceived it to be before is different than what it is now. And that's really exciting. So thank you for watching. I will invite you to look at my blog, which I will be making live soon. Obviously, it takes a long time for me to type all this up. I'm also going to do a continuation video on the haiku, which some piezoelectricity. I've had more reference to that. And I'm going to do a more simplified version of this possibly for my next video. So thank you so much again. If you like this, please subscribe, like the video, and I invite you to share it with others who maybe have questions. And if you think this might stimulate them in such a way that will help an activation or help, expansion, then in love and light, guys. Thank you.